All right, I'd like to
You're the
call
actual
the
member.
budget committee meeting for April 5th to order. In attendance, we have Joan, Julie, myself, and can we have approval of the agenda?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I don't believe there's any public comments. So, Ally, budget update?
Yep. Yeah, so currently for this year's budget, we only really have one update, and that is that high-cost special education aid will increase our revenues by about 350 to 375,000. We do have some recommendations on how to maximize this revenue, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next steps, the later agenda items.
Okay, and then the 24-25 budget, is there anything on the timeline?
Just to let you know, we'll be bringing the first draft of the budget to the May budget committee meeting, so we'll be asking you guys to concur the day before the regular board meeting, but other than that, nothing.
Is there a plan to have the leadership meeting towards the end of April? It's on the timeline, but with the board? Or is that? I think the 22nd, 26th.
Yeah, so what Mark's referring to is at some times in the past, we have gone through and we've had a special board meeting and leadership team meeting to review, the budget requests. We don't have that currently scheduled because we handled the process a little differently this year. We spent the focus of our time with Brian Grabarski, Randy, myself, and Ally having individual building and department meetings with all administrators in the district. We then put together last month that more extensive document that identified what the top 3 to 4 choices coming out of each building really were. So we went in a little bit of a different direction in our process with how we were presenting that this year. So we don't currently have that scheduled. It doesn't mean we can't come back to something like that moving forward, but to answer your question, we're not currently planning to have that take place in April.
Thank you.
Okay, so for next steps, we drafted another memo that stemmed from the memo we brought to you guys last month. And last month had everybody from every building and department, their top priorities. Brian, Steve, Randy, and I went and met with each of them, and they let us know what they felt was the most important for their building or department, and we put all of those in that memo. And then after that, Steve and I met with Randy again to kind of go over all of those priorities, and then Randy kind of gave us his input on what he felt was the most important for us to bring to the board and be able to achieve with the funding sources that we have available. So I'll go through the memo, and if you have any questions, just stop me along the way. So the first priority that we have is at Arboretum, we want to increase social work FTE. This would be an increase of 0.5 FTE. And then that is because right now their current half an FTE allocation is getting pulled away from their building because she's been doing so much with McKinney-Vento. McKinney-Vento has really been taking up a lot of her time, so Arboretum hasn't really been getting their 50% social worker. So we would be able to fund the half of an FTE for a social worker through the aid for school mental health, and then also fund 10 for any remaining dollars that would not be covered by that grant. At the high school, we are looking to do a weight room coordinator, a supervisor. This would be a stipend per season, similar to what a coaching contract is. This would be funded through Fund 10, and it would cost about $18,000 per school year. At the middle school, we would be looking to move clubs and organizations from Fund 10 to Fund 80, just like the sports are currently. We would be able to free up $100,000 in Fund 10 by moving the organizations and clubs to Fund 80. And this would just mean that all middle school programs would be open to any students in the community. For student services, there are some memos attached that Lisa drafted up at the bottom of the document, but otherwise, for student services, we would be looking at a bilingual counselor. This would be funded through transfer of service. And I'll also just note that a bilingual counselor is part of the requirements for having a bilingual program. We would also be looking at a bilingual paraeducator that would also be funded through transfer of service. And then also increasing school nursing by half an FTE, which would be funded through Fund 10.
Can I ask, where would those, the counselor and the paraeducator, where would you house those?
Thanks for the question, Joan. We are thinking that the bilingual counselor would service all of K-12, but they would be housed at the high school, and spend at least 50% of the time there. Bilingual counselor, as you know, for post-secondary planning and just access, it's a real complicated system. And so, although they'd be servicing all families, at least half the time would be spent at the high school. We don't have a space necessarily set aside for them yet, but we'll figure that out. Also, the bilingual paraeducator would be full-time at the high school. We have one paraeducator right now, and it's working really great because then we're not pulling teaching certified teachers away from content areas, and sometimes it's just about translation to provide that access, not necessarily content or instructional practice. So an additional paraeducator would help service. And we have had a lot of our newcomer students at the high school level. So there are great barriers when it comes to language, not necessarily content. And school nursing right now, sorry, did you have a question about nursing too?
No,
Just the.
Tell us.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. So for school nursing, we currently have our 2 full-time people. They're split across 3 buildings. And in the memo, I put in some statistics about, and just observations, noticing, how medically complex, and increasing medical needs there are, especially at the elementary levels. So pretty significant diabetes management, allergies, just more complex. And so having 2 people spread across 3 buildings is a lot, especially when a health assistant is out, then one of those nurses covered for that health assistant. So having an additional half-time would give, in theory, those 2 nurses 2 schools, and then a half person could float between 2 schools as well, and it would just feel more manageable to them and give a little more flexibility in the event that someone is out, because it's not really a position that we could just put a sub in, because the medical needs are just more specific than that, requires some specific training. And I'd like to increase that to a full-time at some point, so we would have 3 full nurses, which feels more manageable. But for next year, I think just creating a half-time position would be super helpful to the registered nurses that we have.
Is that hard to fill?
What's
It's a
that?
halftime position.
I'm sorry.
Is that hard to fill with a halftime slot or?
I don't know that it would be. I
Okay.
think we have people who have been subbing who already may be interested,
Okay.
but maybe not interested in full-time right now. So that's something
Sure,
to
sure.
consider.
Okay.
It's a good
And the
question.
Sarah, is that linked to the heritage science expansion
It's
to some degree or not?
It wouldn't be supporting the program, but it would be supporting the students who are involved in the
Right.
program without pulling a teacher to do so.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Great questions.
Thank you.
I feel we have a very good understanding of these programs, and I appreciate that. Okay,
Thank you.
Allie, you're doing great. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to special education. These positions would be a second administrative assistant, which could be funded through the federal flow-through grant. And then also a second special education coordinator, which could also be funded through the flow-through grant. I'll talk a little bit about how our funding will be maximized in special ed in relation to the high-cost special education claim that we did this year. So this was the first year that we submitted for high-cost special education aid. It's for students who have an excess cost of over $30,000 per school year. And this year, I believe, was the first year that it was online, and the submission process just changed a little bit, and we were able to really, with the help of CISA 5, maximize our claim for this. I think when Steve and I looked this year, we would probably be the 4th or 5th highest claim in the state for high cost aid. So we, thanks to Tiffany and her long hours spent on this, we were able to claim a lot, and that's how we'll be getting the $350,000 to $375,000 in high cost aid. So if you scroll down a little bit, or I can scroll through Rebecca, I have the mouse. So just a little bit about this year and how we're funding some of the positions. So in the federal flow-through grant this year, we have the special education coordinator, the school psychs, and some paraprofessionals. We plan to do some accounting adjustments and move them out of the grant and into district funded dollars, because then we can receive categorical aid on them as well. And then we would also be purchasing some special education electric vans to replace 2 of our older vans that need to be replaced. And then moving forward to next year to really maximize our dollars, we would put the new admin assistant in the grant, and then also the new special education coordinator in the grant. And then we're allowed to put 16% of our sites into the grant because the other 84% can receive categorical aid. So we would move the 84% out of the grant, and we would fund those through the district. We would also move the current special ed coordinator out of the grant and pay for that through the district, and then also the paraprofessionals.
So the items that are in the right-hand column of 32%
32.
are covered through the categorical aids, and then we would pick up the other 68.
Yeah, so like by next year, well, for fixing it for this year, we can claim high cost aid on those
Right.
positions if they're attached to students. We also get the categorical aid at 32.5%. So by moving them out of the grant, we'd really be maximizing how much aid we get back for those positions. And then moving forward to next year, we would keep them out of the grant to also maximize those dollars.
Are we looking at an additional special ed coordinator, or is this a new position?
It'd be additional. And so if we'd have like a 7-12, the person who's currently in the K-12
one now.
position, yes, would be a 7-12, and then we would also have an early childhood through 6.
Would that person be housed out here?
We're kind of in discussions about that, but it does sound like if there's space available, that they would be housed out here. And it would be nice to have that person in close proximity to Jared and myself and Joyce. So, but my goal for having the second position is really to have both of them, because the Jared's position reviewing all of the paperwork for the entire district right now, a significant portion of his job is doing that compliance piece. Whereas if we can split that in half, I can have them out supporting in buildings more. And my hope, especially for the elementary position, is to offset some of the contracted behavior consultant services so that we have somebody out that can do like behavioral consultation with kids. If a teacher or a principal is feel like we're really struggling, we don't know where to go next with a student and behavior, what are some ideas we can try, that person can be kind of the first line of defense. And that I can decrease, my goal over time is to decrease the amount of money we're spending on contracting out for those behavior services, so that those two can be out in the schools supporting a little bit more, so.
And
So.
what
go ahead.
about the assistant?
Yeah, that's for Joyce, so that's additional, like, as we continue to grow, like, right now, we're probably over 700 plans total. And some of those plans are revisited once a year, some of those plans revisited 4 or 5 times a year, so she processes all of that paperwork, so our goal with adding the position is, first of all, so Joyce isn't here every Saturday, because she's been here like every Saturday the entire year, I feel like. So we want to make her job manageable, but also be able to specifically take pieces. We're gonna take all the section 504 plans, all of the early learner screening, there's just some big projects we're just gonna take and put on a new person so that Joyce is able to stay caught up with the other pieces of paperwork, so that are funneled through her office, so.
So,
Go ahead.
I've always been open to requests, especially for special ed. In reflecting on this, looking at the notes, in preparation for today, it seems awfully quick. We just hired a coordinator and now we want 2 coordinators. And what's changed in a year's time? Just the vision, or that there's resources that will help cover it?
The vision has always been for 2. So even when we added Jared's position, the discussion at that time was, we would like my ideal world would have been to add 2 at the same time. And I guess when you think about other districts, you know, of similar size, like you look at a Middleton, like they have program support teachers, which is essentially a coordinator at every single building. So there's generally not just one person that's, you know, yes, you have a director who's overseeing, but as the district has grown, like we have to have like some middle management people in order to help with not only like feedback and coordination with parents, but also support out in the buildings too, and support for principals and for teachers. And as we add new special ed teachers, training for special ed teachers, a huge amount of Jared's time this year has been meeting weekly with some of our new special ed teachers, teaching them the system, teaching them the paperwork, helping them with planning, those types of things. So I guess my vision has always been for 2 so that we could maximize their time out in the buildings.
First of all, I'm very appreciative of all the work you put into finding the numbers that help support the additional funding. You and Steve and Ali, great work. But I guess my question is, how impactful is this on the actual teachers in the building and the students in the building versus helping on the administrative end of things?
I would say it's kind of an even split between the 2, because really the teachers are able to get more support from having that additional coordinator position, first of all, as someone who can serve as an LEA at their IEPs, but also somebody who can directly support them when they're struggling. Again, examples, I mean, every year we see more and more challenging behaviors in students, and just being able to interface with that and provide support where it's needed without having to wait a week or 2 weeks to have a behavior specialist come in and work with them is where that support piece is, but also feet on the ground in terms of helping. Jared's done a ton with co-teaching this year at the high school and helping support our co-teaching partnerships. You know, that's directly impacting kids every single day. And
so how can we be assured that when the classroom teacher needs them, they're there? I'm a little nervous about housing them here.
okay,
If they're supposed to be out there helping. Is there something that we can relocate them, so that they're in a 7-12 setting if they're. And I don't know if there's facilities for that, but
yeah, good question.
as a board member, I would feel much more comfortable if I knew that these people are out there with the troops in a easy access versus up here separated from them.
That makes sense. I guess I can tell you from my perspective in terms of housing Jared here was because he has to have close proximity to Joyce, because he's, you know, shuffling so much paperwork to her. So but I can also say, and I don't know, he's probably at his desk 20% of the time, I would say, maybe 25, because he is out in the buildings so much. So it's not that he's here a huge percentage of that time. He's really out in the buildings a lot, so.
If I could just jump in for a minute, I really appreciate this dialogue and your willingness to just look at this, because this is confusing. There's a lot of numbers and accounting changes and new funding that we're looking at here, so we're kind of throwing a lot at you. The one thing I'll just share from my lens that I have noticed that is significantly different with special ed today than it was 5 years ago is the internal coordination of transportation. So 5 years ago, we ran multiple special education routes and coordinating all of that fell on Lamers. But as we moved forward with the bus driver shortage, one thing that the board did was approve the 2 new special education vans that are handicap accessible. And so we purchased those. We also had prior purchased special ed minivans that were originally intended to be used for the transition program to help get kids to Piggly Wiggly and other work sites. We have now taken on internal, and I mean the special ed department has taken on the internal management of transportation for 3 full traditional special ed bus routes. So in preparation for the meeting, we didn't include this information in there, but Mark prompted our thinking as far as additional data that would be helpful in the discussion. Ally and I looked it up. We would be spending around $50,000 per special ed route if we were doing things the old way or what we did before, if we had the drivers. Doing it the approach we're taking now, including allocating or depreciating the van over 5 years, is about a $20,000 cost. Driver, van, insurance, gas. There's about a $30,000 savings per route that we're seeing right now compared to the way we did it before. Jared is taking that on. So Ally and I have sat in meetings where we've heard the coordination that's going on between all of the students and getting them to school. It's a daily process to really coordinate all those students. We also sat in meetings where we realized that McKinney-Vento students are no longer able to be transported the way we would like, which is to be able to call like a third party. In fact, we used to have one in Waunakee that no longer, will service McKinney-Vento students. We sat in a meeting where we talked about Jared also starting to try to coordinate some McKinney-Vento students. And we had quotes for a student that was out of our district, but within 10 miles from here. I think it was $250 a day.
Yeah.
Which is a huge cost. It turned out that Jared, knowing his 3 routes that he's managing, says, okay, this one will go here, and then pick the student up and bring them in. So special ed has, in effect, in the last couple of years, kind of built also an internal transportation component that really didn't exist before. It's been by default because Lamers couldn't provide the drivers and we had to find alternative ways. I do think that's just an important piece to keep in mind, that that's a growing area, is really our management of vans and transportation for students with individual needs. That our contractor, due to the shortage of drivers, we've assumed that role. There's cost benefits to doing that, but then there's the daily responsibility as well. So it wouldn't be fair to say Jared is really truly performing the special ed coordinator role that you originally envisioned.
True.
Because transportation has become a big chunk of what he does. And it actually was a big chunk of what you did the year before, which wasn't envisioned in your role. So just to bring that up, that's also a factor.
So the plan would be the administrative assistant would take over that, probably.
We would probably split with the coordinator because Jared coordinates all those pieces. So if there's somebody that's out sick, like he goes and drives the van and goes and picks up those kids. So Or I do, I've been back up to it, and it depends if he's out of the district or not, so I mean, that coordination piece, my plan would be, let's coordinate the EC6 transportation with one person and 712 with one person, so that would be my hope, is that we can split that up a little bit, because it is a lot, and it's every single morning, especially if somebody's out sick, then it's. And then calling the parents if we're running late, if the person didn't call in sick until a certain time, and then we're gonna be late picking up, and so it is a lot.
So you have a driver, but when they're not there, we don't have a sub driver.
We do have some sub drivers, but it's contingent on like what day of the week it is. So like certain people can do Tuesday, Thursday, they can't, so there's a lot of intricacies to it in terms of who's available on which day, so.
So Tiffany, would you envision that the administrative assistant, the second position, would be able to take on some of the coordination of that? Instead, because I think your point is
I'm-
getting the coordinators out and
Doing coordinator stuff,
Right.
not doing, I
Yeah.
mean,
Is there a
that's
way that you
just,
could see that?
Yeah,
yeah, to
absolutely.
maximize their time and yours.
Absolutely, I mean, we'd love to have another person in our sub driver pool, so if our new person was like, yeah, I'll drive if I need to do backup, in terms of that support staff person, that would be fabulous too, but yeah, that would be wonderful if we can get that piece onto another person, because there's no way Joyce could take that on.
I would like to point out
I think one.
to the board members too, that by moving the huge expense over to the right, that increases the amount of the high cost aid we get next year. And so there's return on investment for that too. So we're spending it, but then we recover a good chunk of that through the high cost aid. This year, that was a 350,000, did you say?
Yep.
And Steve,
Right,
you're-
do something out of that.
I did, one other thing, I think that, when we talk about supporting people in buildings, that Jared is integral in, is he onboards all of our special education paraeducators. So every new person in spends their first day with him, where he gets them, trained, helps them understand what our expectations are, that helps them feel welcome. And then he also is the person that evaluates all those folks. So he's in the building with them, coaching them on their performance, which directly supports kids. Because that is the essence of their work. And so it is a role. I'm not sure he's at his desk even 20% of the time.
Yeah, that was, yes.
I'll be honest with you, because I mean, his office and mine are very close, and so he spends a lot of time with staff. And that's teaching staff, hourly staff, and so it is a support role for sure.
Any other questions?
So looking at athletics, we would be looking to add a middle school athletic director. Currently, Nick has a lot going on with the high school athletics, so middle school sometimes gets pushed to the side. So we would be looking to do a stipend amount, and a lot of times middle school athletic directors are teachers, so we would just adjust their schedule as needed if that was the case. This could also be funded through Fund 80 since middle school athletics are part of Fund 80 currently. And the cost estimate for that would be about $18,000. Also, at the high school right now, there is a second administrative assistant for athletics, which is only a part-time position. We would be looking to increase that FTE for that position to in turn take over all of the middle school athletics and then also clubs and organizations if that's moved to Fund 80 stuff. And so that's not being for the high school anymore. There would just be one person for the middle school, and then that person would also still be doing all of this facility scheduling. That would be funded through Fund 80, and then that would be an additional cost of about $45,000 to make it full-time. For elementary curriculum, we would be looking to increase FTE for a reading or math interventionist at a Title I schools. Each year, the Title I schools change, so this could be a floating position from year to year to support the schools who are identified as Title I. And Amy was kind of envisioning either a 1.0 FTE for math or reading or half for each position. And this would be a cost estimate of about $100,000, which would be funded through Title I. And for technology, we were just looking to update some handbook language so that they could have a continuing education piece for their tech certifications. That would kind of mirror credit reimbursement for administrators. And then district-wide, we were looking to extend contract days up to 3 days for pathways, the tech integration specialists, and our instructional coaches. And this cost estimate would be a little under $20,000 to do all of those positions to 3 extended days.
If I could just add a couple of comments. So we know during the budget planning process that between the planned 5% increase in health insurance, the planned CPI increases and compensation increases, and the investment in the middle school schedule, we basically were at a balanced budget. So we knew going into the meetings with building principals and department or building and department leaders that whatever we were going to bring forward for consideration had to have alternative funding attached to it. So the document that we prepared is all based on the concept that alternative funding sources have to be identified for this picture. Because of the fact that I'll call it our traditional budgeting process is basically balanced for next year, which you will see as Ally puts together the first draft of the budget for next month. What you see here fundamentally is a creative solution using a variety of sources. Ally touched on things like transfer of service, high cost special ed aid, Fund 80, Title I funding. So that she's touching on a lot of topics. We do understand that there's kind of a lot in this memo. There's a lot of different topics. We're happy to explore any of them. We were intending to spend the majority of our time on this meeting going through this to answer any questions you might have. We did get a chance to talk about this topic with Mark this week. A couple of things that I would say we would want to communicate a little bit further to you on than what's in this memo. When we talk about Fund 80, it's important to know that Fund 80 is supported by a tax levy. The tax levy for Fund 80 is outside the state revenue limit formula. So we have to be cognizant of the fact that the community is funding at least partially, if not all, the programs in Fund 80. So when we moved middle school athletics to Fund 80, we communicated with St. John's and said, any of your students are welcome to participate in our middle school program. And we've absolutely had students participate in our middle school program, as well as homeschooled students, or as well as 7th and 8th graders who may have chosen other districts through open enrollment were able to participate. Now, high school is different, but in middle school, because we're not a WIA program, an open enrolled Waunakee student, McFarland, can participate in our programs after school. So the Fund 80 for the middle school opens up all of our programming. So that's a philosophical decision that the board would have to be okay with, that it is moving the remaining portion of our after school programming at the middle school into Fund 80, picked up by a Fund 80 levy. So it is an accounting change that is allowed by the state as long as the program becomes available to all students in the community. So if a St. John's 7th grader wants to participate in a music program at our middle school, one of the after school programs, they're welcome to. Right now, that program is for public school students only. So it basically, in effect, would change that to look like athletics. High cost special ed aid we touched on. This is a program that in the past we have evaluated with our former special ed director and myself. We've evaluated this and did not believe that in the past we were able to get to that threshold. Well, the 30,000 threshold has remained the same for a long time. And with inflationary costs and the costs of staffing and other costs in schools, the 30,000 remains the same. More students are getting over that level. We also have seen the state change the way that that process works from originally a paper form to an online form. And the process is just different today. And then Tiffany took what could only be described as an incredibly deep dive into this program, to the point where Ally was looking at costing from like 60 some students to go through and try and determine who could be eligible or not. And we also spent a significant amount of time with a CISA 5 consultant who was also working with Oshkosh schools. Oshkosh was putting in a similar claim for the first time this spring to align our work with what this person was doing with Oshkosh. And then there's the title program, and really what we're doing with the title program is ensuring that the students in the Title I schools, and as Ally mentioned, that can change from year to year, are receiving additional math and reading support by a staff member who may have to move locations. Now, that's different than our current, math and reading interventionists who are assigned to Heritage, assigned to whatever. So if the Title I schools for next year are Heritage at the middle school, that's where we're proposing that this person would have to work. And if the following year, the Title I school shifts to the high school, they'd have to move. Because this is truly designed to have the position be tied to the Title I schools, not to the actual school they're working in. So it's a little bit of a different philosophy, because we are currently providing similar reading and math interventionist support to all of our schools, and have really increased our investment in those areas since COVID. This is really taking it to the next step by saying we're going to increase our investment further, and the person or persons would have to move depending on which schools are assigned Title I. So we're definitely throwing a lot at you here. We want to just take a pause. Thankfully, Lisa's here. If you have questions about transfer service and the EL program, Tiffany's here on the special ed, because we know there's some complicated stuff there. Brian can answer any questions from like the HR perspective, but what our intent of this would be to ask the committee to either forward all or portions of this to the board meeting on Monday night, so that Brian can proceed with the posting to find out what is possible. Can we find a 0.50 nurse? Can we find, some of these positions, so that as Ally's preparing the first draft of the budget, would be able to implement some of these funding strategies into the first draft of the budget. As an example, the middle school athletic director, are we able to find someone who's willing to stipend that role? That's a to be determined. But on Monday night, we would ask for consideration of that. Brian would then work through that process to determine whether or not, we think we can find someone who fits that opportunity. And if so, we're suggesting Fund 80, because it is a Fund 80 program for middle school athletics. Thoughts on questions, concerns, anything that you want to dive a little deeper into, we're happy to do it.
Is Title I funding state funding or federal?
Title I is federal funding.
Fund 80 is, how would that appear on somebody's tax form? Is that part of the school line?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Fund 80 is a part of the larger school district tax levy that definitely shows up on the school portion of the taxes. And communities throughout Wisconsin utilize Fund 80 very differently. As an example, there are schools in Wisconsin that have the entire village rec program inside the school district on like a Fund 80. Oshkosh is an example of that. There is no like city of Oshkosh, like what the village of Waunakee does for our students here. There isn't that there. It's through Oshkosh schools. So there are some school districts that have very, very robust Fund 80 programs because of the way their community is set up. The way our community is set up is we do have the village of Waunakee that runs a tremendous amount of programs outside of our programs. But so it's entirely different in every community, but it does add into the overall total that appears on the school line.
I'll just say too, our Fund 80 tax levy is pretty minimal. It's only about $375,000. We do also have a really healthy fund balance in Fund 80, so if we wanted to dip into that a little bit, we do have that as an option as well.
Do you feel the Title I federal funds, are they pretty consistent? I mean, are they something that you feel you can rely on?
Title I is very consistent, yep, from year to year. And we are utilizing the Title I funds currently. The Title I funding helped us increase our investment in reading and math to the current levels that we're at today. What we're suggesting is that the Title I funds in effect be directed towards that additional investment in the Title I schools. And the district would pick up the staffing that's currently funded through Title I to have that base level be clear between all buildings. And separate out that the Title I staff is truly above and beyond what a base level of support is from the district. And then the individuals would need to know going into it that if the Title I schools change, their physical location of work would also have to change.
So all total out of this list and all the different funding, what comes out of Fund 10?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Fund 10 component, funding was freed up through a couple of mechanisms. When you saw the middle school club and orgs recommendation to be changed to Fund 80, that freed up about $100,000 in Fund 10. So the Fund 10 switch with Fund 80 for middle school clubs and orgs almost lines up perfectly with the Title I component that we're recommending.
Okay.
Beyond that, you did see on the very first one where Ally said the social worker is about a $20,000 Fund 10 impact. Let's just quick run through them with my Ally. So the Fund 10 social worker, the weight room is a Fund 10 cost. So let's say 20,000 for the social worker. We think it'll actually almost all be funded through that program, but it's at least 50%. So 20,000, another 18,000 for the high school weight room. The nursing, so add the 40,000, nothing in special ed. And then not the middle school Fund 80 program, the Title I, and then the 19,000 for extended contracts. So it's really funded in two ways, the Fund 80 transfer. The second is what Mark had mentioned. By our special ed accounting changes, we are at a minimum able to increase the state categorical aid coming back to the district by 32.5%, which is over $100,000. That is a benefit to Fund 10. And why I say that's a benefit to Fund 10 is Fund 10 has to pay the difference between the revenues coming in for Fund 27 or special ed and the expenses. So if we're able to capture another 115,000 in categorical aid, the transfer from 10 to 27 drops by that 115,000 and can then be used for Fund 10 programs. So improvements in our process in Fund 27 also improve the general fund. They really work together. Which is why, as we were looking at this holistically, our thought was one of the best ways to return the investment between federal, state, and local funds is to use the high-cost special ed aid to further invest in special ed, which further provides categorical aid. The other thing Mark mentioned, by moving the paraeducators out of the grant into the district funding, that further increases our federal Medicaid reimbursement, as well as state categorical aid reimbursement, as well as allows Tiffany to then assign those paraeducators to high-cost special ed students, if that's what their role is, because currently we have to subtract them out. So it really kind of all works together in a puzzle piece to try to maximize revenues. It's important to know this isn't what we have to do. It is a path that allows us to put together the complete picture that you see on this memo. Absent of that, we would be saying next month, we have a balanced first draft of the budget based on the other items I identified, and our high priorities from the buildings and departments are just gonna be put on pause. So it's kind of a way for us to look at some of the things that we heard from people and put together a funding package to accomplish it. But as I mentioned, it's not the only way that this could be done. It's one of the ways it could be done.
When we're adding new FTEs, they're going to be permanent additions. So you're always shifting where the funding is coming from to pay those. How much of a risk are we at that it can't be creative in 2 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a huge pillar of this plan is high-cost special ed aid. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's a program that has received increased attention at the state legislative level, with a greater recognition that school districts are facing significantly increased cost for, in particular, some special ed students who just have significant needs. In the 23-25 state budget, the state prioritized additional funding into this program. So there's additional funding going into both years of the state budget to this program. And while any future state budget could pull funding from this program or go in a different direction, it certainly appears that whether it's Tiffany's statewide group or other individuals are calling attention to the legislatures around this need. And it looks like further investments are being made here. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that, as the district continues to grow, I mean, ultimately we identified 57 students in the district that their special ed costs were $30,000 or more through this program. And from my perspective, we just continue to grow every single year. So I don't see that number changing significantly. And also the unique thing about this program is it's something we submit every year. So those same 57 students, assuming their costs are still at that level next year, will continue to qualify for that high cost special education aid. So and it's something, we all learned a lot this year in terms of just going through the process and what thresholds we needed to get to. And even now, when I'm working on some additional environmental changes for one of our students at the middle school, that's going to cost us, thousands of dollars. Well, if I take it out of my grant, we can't necessarily claim it, or it doesn't help us as much under high cost aid. But if we pay it out of district funds, I can get a big percentage of that money back under high cost aid. So it's just really helped us think about yes, we're fronting the cost, but we're gonna recoup a lot more of it if we use high cost special ed aid. So I've learned a lot through this process from Stephen Alley and from the Arkansas Academy too, so.
I came up because I wanted to make sure I was on the screen for this. I think you'd made a statement, Judy, about when we add an FTE where it's permanent. That's really not the case with any employee of the school district. We have been very fortunate in our past that we have been able to continue growing. And as a result, we have not ever been in the spot where we've needed to cut staff that we have had in the past. But the reality is that for our contracted employees, which are generally certified or administrative, we are bound to them for the terms of a contract. And those contracts are 1 or 2 years. And if we want to no longer employ them, we can non-renew a contract. For all of our hourly employees, they're at will, which means that they can leave when they want, or we can end their role with us when we want, as long as it's not for an illegal reason, discriminatory reason. And so while we have not been in the position to do that in the past, the other reality facing us is that if we don't pass an operational referendum in 2 years, we will absolutely be having to end employment with staff. And so there is no such thing as a permanent staff person. We have a relationship with them that is either bound by at will or contracts, but both can be in.
We do appreciate the question because that's important to take a look at. I mean, this is our first really deep look at the high cost special ed aid. Tiffany has identified a certain number of students, which most of them will remain next year. New students will come on. And then we're making some moves here, which will allow us to increase the pool of what we can claim. So we're confident that with the current direction of the state legislature, which is to prioritize this program. I mean, the legislature has prioritized this program over the last couple of years. And with the statewide emphasis that continues to be placed by education groups on the importance of special ed funding, it would be difficult for me to imagine that this particular funding would be pulled. In fact, I would predict it's only going to continue to become a priority as more and more education groups focus on special education, whether it's the categorical aid, the high cost special ed aid. So I think we're in a strong position that special education funding will probably continue to be a priority of the state. At what level, of course, to be determined, but I think we're confident that this is a focus and an important funding source for the state. And we feel confident that we're going to be able to continue to repeat this in the future.
The other thing I guess I like to point out is that due to the hard work, all the homework you guys did, we're able to add a lot of services that are going to directly impact our kids at zero cost to the budget. And to me, that's a win-win. You did a great job of talking about how the coordinator will make a big difference, case management and all that kind of stuff. And so some of it may not be directly to an individual student, but it makes the services to the students better. And you can just look at just about every position here and has a direct impact on students in some way at zero cost to the budget or increase. So I would like to make a motion to accept the proposals.
Second.
Any more comments or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Appreciate how long that took. Appreciate your attention to it.
It is a lot of, and thank you, Steve, for putting all the pieces together, because it's a really complex puzzle. For sure.
Thank you. So, quick question for the committee members. Do you have another 5 or 10 minutes for us to run through the transportation issue, or we can certainly save it to Monday night? It's on the agenda for Monday night as well. If you have 5 or 10 minutes, Ally and I could just prompt your thinking on a couple of things. This isn't necessarily an action item, but our intent was if we had the time, just so that the budget committee members could start thinking about this. prior to Monday night, or just let us know if there's any reactions that you might have initially. Do you think we have enough time to look at it for a few minutes?
I've got nothing. Judy's gonna sit here all day. I was
Uh,
waiting for another meeting, but I don't know.
if you're okay with it, we're gonna touch on uh, what we view as a board level decision that's gonna need to be made regarding the new heritage. And the time to make that is before the school opens. And it's really gonna affect probably the future, precedent setting for what transportation is provided to and from that school. We want to make you aware of that. We also want to talk about the middle school because that's the most significant recommended change on here. Ultimately, what's included in the attachment for this meeting and next Monday night is a high-level map report from our consultants on each of the areas that they studied. They studied each of our schools because we asked them to review areas that haven't really been reviewed before. So as an example of what they did, so this first map is Arboretum Elementary School. The shaded area is the newer development that has been recently added to the community over the last couple of years. The point of this analysis was, is it safe for the students in the Arboretum Village type area to be walking to and from school? Are there any hazards there that as a district we should be looking at? So the shaded area is what they looked at. The recommendation, the bottom line is in the upper right, you can see in the box, no recommended changes to the walk zones for Arboretum. But then in the lower left, they're saying recommendation for safety. They believe the intersection of Hogan and Arboretum, where the majority of these students are currently walking or riding their bike to school, should be improved. So they're calling that out in the lower left, and they're showing what a recommended better visibility crosswalk location for students at that age would look like. These are some examples of crosswalks that they have helped work through the process with municipalities and others in other communities. So in the lower left, you see a different looking crosswalk than what you currently see in Waunakee, much wider, much more visible to approaching traffic. And they're also recommending that it be lit. These
Would they
are,
have blinking lights too, like they do on Main Street or nine?
and that
on
one does
19?
not, yeah.
Okay.
And so basically what they're identifying is it's safe to walk to school from that location, not recommending hazards at all, but calling our attention to the fact that it could be better.
And
Now,
who pays for the improvements?
so currently, we would not have the ability to just implement what's in the lower left-hand corner of these maps. We would need to begin the dialogue with the village of Waunakee to say, this is what has come out of this process. This is what we are looking at doing, and we would engage in that conversation with them. Over time, we have paid for like the push button stop locations at new schools. But the village has paid for them as like community-wide improvements. So when you look at like Highway Q, the school district didn't pay for those, the village did. And those are significantly improved from where they were 5 to 10 years ago. So we would approach the village with an interest in certainly partnering with them. We'd have to get their perspective on what they think according to these recommendations. They may have other ideas. But that would be, I would call it a separate process to the one that basically saying in the upper right, we don't recommend any changes at Arboretum is what the traffic consultants are telling you. Ellie's got the mouse, so she can move on to the next screen. Prairie Elementary School, upper right, recommend, no recommended changes. What did we ask them to look at? The whole Heritage Hill subdivision. After an analysis of Heritage Hills, they feel like it is safe walk and biking zones for the students in Heritage Hills to get to Prairie. No recommended changes there. Okay, so the new Heritage Elementary School. Let me orientate you to this map for a minute. The dotted line that goes around is our current 1 mile school board policy transportation limit for K-4 students. And then you see different colors on the map that indicate different pieces of information. The green is identified as safe for an elementary age student to walk to school. The yellow is caution, in effect, a cautionary area that improvements in this area would make it safer. Again, their call out is in the upper left of this map as to what would make walking for an elementary age student from the yellow to school safer. The red is the traffic counts are too high. And they would identify those as hazardous transportation areas. So to the east of Highway Q would be a hazardous transportation area for students at the new Heritage Elementary School. The area of board feedback would be if we keep our transportation policy as it exists. You can see in the yellow that is quite complicated. There's going to be homes, right next to each other, across the street from each other. One is eligible, one is not. As the circle goes through that neighborhood, we're going to be identifying homes that are eligible and homes that are not, that are literally going to be right next to each other based on the 1 mile. There's really a couple of alternatives here. One is to keep the 1 mile zone in place, and to do that, to look at those homes in that area and identify who's eligible and who's not. The other is to use Highway Q and Main Street or 19 as your transportation policy for Heritage. If you do that, you have then lined up the transportation policies for both Heritage and intermediate school. They're the same. But you will have to know the Heritage policy is just slightly different than Prairie and Arboretum. And you would have to know that the homes that are basically to the north of the dotted line, but are to the south of 19, would no longer be eligible for transportation around the 1 mile boundary. At the board level, we've talked about transportation and the fact that the more complicated it is, the more frustrating it is for families. We currently have that situation in quite a few different geographical areas where transportation is provided for certain grades and it's not for other grades. We would be creating that if we don't align the transportation with Q and 19. However, current board policy would create that dotted line. Administration is prepared to implement and communicate whatever the decision is made by the board. If the policy remains the same, we'll identify those homes that are outside of that circle that'll be eligible. And we just, again, have to clearly communicate your K-4 student can ride the bus, your 5th and 6th grade student can't. And when they go from 4th grade to 5th grade, they can no longer ride the bus. So that would be the communication that would be necessary.
And you would be doing that,
And
right, Steve?
we would be doing it. But again, I'm just throwing out the alternative for the board to consider is, do you want to use the hazardous areas, which are Q and 19, which really truly would create a similarity for that section of the community? Mark?
So Steve, if, with that plan, then anything east of Q would be bus, eligible.
Absolutely. Yep.
So do you see that adding significantly to the number of buses that we would need to use?
Yeah, that's a great question. So back prior to the referendum vote, we were receiving that very question from community members. You know, what would the transportation situation look like if Heritage was moved from where it is today to the location where it's being built? Lamers did some data for us, and there are about as many kids in the new bus area as would be removed from the current busing area. It was viewed by Lamers when they did that analysis that it basically was an even exchange. That buses would now be in the red area. The ones that used to be in the green area are just swapping sides of Q basically, and the bus routing would remain the same. So adding the students outside of that circle, but within Q and 19, we don't expect that would have a negative fiscal impact or a positive fiscal impact. It's just that one of our routes is going to have to loop in there while also going to the other side of Q. It's more of really, as a board member, how do you feel about that concern that community members have had that our transportation systems are complicated and it's hard for people to know eligibility for particular homes? We certainly could make things simpler for the K through 6 community at that site by just using Q and 19 as the definition of eligibility, and then work with the village for any safety improvements we can make in that area. Or we can keep the dotted line and just have that little area at the top that's going to be a little bit confusing for people.
I like the idea of simplicity, but within the simplicity, you are gonna have some parents who are gonna say, well, how come that kid at Arboretum gets a bus ride when this, and my kid doesn't? I don't know how much that's gonna be, but I still think for the time being, this makes the most sense. And at some point, we're gonna need to reconfigure anyways, and I don't know if it's gonna be with dotted lines or neighborhoods, but this one makes sense to me.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because what I would be able to share with a parent from Arboretum is map 1, which was the fact that the board asked the traffic consultants to look at every school and from a safety perspective. And so what I would share with an Arboretum parent is looking at map 1 and going out the mile. It has been determined that Arboretum Village is a safe walking location to the school. Just like the area in yellow is a safe area to walk to school, and did not meet the threshold that to the west of Q did. So I think we'd be able to share with community members that the board authorized a very comprehensive look at all of the schools. And so this wasn't necessarily directed at just one of the schools, if that makes sense. So this is just something to think about for Monday night. What we're gonna really be asking for on Monday night is summer school is preparing to set up their transportation. Should they be looking at because they're actually wanting to consider putting both intermediate and heritage kids on the same bus, because they're gonna be in the same school. We could then use Q and 19 to determine, it would make it very simple. So we're just looking to make sure, are you okay with that plan for the summer? And are you okay with us adopting, again, we're gonna ask for final decision in May, but planning according to these maps, basically.
it makes so much sense keeping it as the same as the intermediate. That would be such a difficult explanation.
And we're really balancing distance and safety.
Yeah.
So, and so when we have to make it fuzzy, we're looking at probably safety is more important than distance.
Yep, absolutely.
And
Yeah, that's a great point, Judy, because when it is, it's the safety component that steps in, because like the area in red, it's important to know, does have 3 crosswalks that we staff with crossing guards and have the push button kind of state-of-the-art safety feature. But with that being said, we're erring on the side of safety. So that's a great way to describe it. Rebecca, would you mind going to the middle school? So the intermediate school basically lines up with kind of what you saw from Heritage, the Q and the 19. The middle school is where the most significant change is being proposed. There's no question this changes decades worth of history as far as transportation to schools. And I just want to share what you're going to hear from Randy on Monday night. Randy's recommendation is that we adopt this plan, but we adopt the plan contingent on the opening of the new school on September 1st of 2026 to give people plenty of notice that along with the opening of the new school, the transportation for the school is going to completely change. That's an option. It's certainly not a requirement, because what you see on this map is also applicable to the current location of the middle school. Randy's perspective is really rooted in, 30+ years of kind of history with how students have been transported to school in 7th and 8th graders, and the fact that this is a major change in transportation for middle school. And really one of the things that just keeping in mind that's different is the traffic consultants looked at each school differently based on the ages of the kids. Our previous plan was a blanket K-8 plan that treated a kindergartner the same way as an 8th grader. So fundamentally, what are you seeing differently in this plan? When you look to, let's just say, to the west of Q, I think that's an easy one to look at. Even though those homes can look out and see the middle school, and even though there is a crossing guard and a push button location right there for middle school kids and staff to get across the street, it was determined over 20 years ago that crossing Q for grades K-8 is a hazard. Our traffic consultants came in and said, that's not the case anymore for 7th and 8th grade students. Between the age of the students, between the safety features that are there today, and the fact that the district staffs 3 locations, 7th and 8th graders are age appropriate to now cross Highway Q with the safety and the assistance that's there. And that transportation should no longer be provided. So what you're seeing is in green is the safe areas for walking. And one of the things that you're gonna notice is it almost includes most of in-town transportation. This is a very significant change. That's just something we want board members to be thinking about. There's no question feedback will be received on this. But Randy's perspective is the more time that is provided for parents to be able to understand what is coming, the more we can communicate it, probably the more that people will understand it. So we just wanted to share that with you. We kind of thought going into this, the middle school might be the area that's going to have the most significant change. And that's really what is coming out of this report. Any thoughts to share initially about this?
think it's just gonna get people thinking and they're gonna be vocal, but got reasons.
So I would say the real big decision for the board to be thinking about is really Randy's recommendation on delaying the implementation of this plan until the new school opens. As opposed to implementing the plan in the fall. Randy just thinks that's not enough notice, thinks that there's a lot of history connected to this, and it's probably better to connect it to the opening of the new school.
Steve, with the current plan, how far north do you go before you get busing?
Okay, yeah, great question. So the current hazardous transportation plan for 7th and 8th graders is 19 Q Woodland Division. It forms a square or just a box, basically.
Yeah.
And everything outside the box is bust.
Okay.
So there's a lot of green on this map that
Yeah.
is outside that box.
Yeah.
Okay, and then at the
I would recommend if we're gonna do this, so they're almost on a yearly basis, we should be putting out a reminder that,
Things are changing.
you know,
Well, and
it's gonna be changing.
the grade levels.
Yeah.
And then high school, minimal changes according to what we're currently doing, because high school students are not eligible. When I described that geographical box, that plan was for K through 8. And this plan just really affirmed that high school students are age appropriate to really do the walking that they currently are. So there really isn't anything of significance coming out of this for the high school. So the two real decision points are really lining up the heritage transportation and what does the board feel is appropriate? And then really the middle school and what does the board feel appropriate for the timing of that? So just things to be thinking about for Monday night.
Well, if there's nothing else,
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We really appreciate your time and thank you, Judy, for jumping in. You know, you gave up another morning to spend with